was a stunning and almost unprecedented shock to Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin power structure. Those widespread anti-corruption demonstrations that shook Russia over the weekend, protesting Putin's regime and corruption in his country. You know, the demonstrations spanned more than 80 Russian cities, making the rallies the largest against the Kremlin since those mass street protests happened in 2011. So, could this outpouring of opposition herald a new challenge to Putin's tenure, or will the effort be crushed? Matthew Rojansky, director of the Kennan Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center and former deputy director of the Russia and Eurasia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, joins us now. Matthew, good to see you. First off, the extent of the resistance took many by surprise, but do you think it will last?
You know, I think this is significant. This is the most people we've seen turn out, not only in Moscow, where the numbers are maybe somewhere between 10 and 20,000. Remember, Moscow is a mega city, more than 10 million people, but also in about 50 or 60 cities across Russia. So in the last 5 years or so, we haven't seen protests of this scale. It's not since 2011, 2012, which is when Vladimir Putin announced, or really used Dmitry Medvedev, his essentially puppet, to announce that he would return to the presidency. That really inflamed anger and passion against the Kremlin. So it's not since then that we've seen protests of this scale. But at the same time, you know, the regime is very firmly in control. You know, riot police outnumbered the demonstrators. Something like several hundred or maybe even 1,000 people were arrested, including Alexei Navalny, the leader of the movement. And he's now been charged with crimes and jailed, so he's not technically eligible to run for office, to run for president against Putin. So, you know, the regime has got a lot of tactics they can deploy against these folks. And
besides the street protests, how do you think could it grow? You know, in the structure in terms of challenging Putin?
Well, what's very interesting about this protest, is distinct from anything we've seen before, is that, you know, for the last 15 or 20 years, since Putin has been in power, since the turn of the millennium, the argument has been that there's a Putin generation, that basically young people who are today in their teens or 20s, what we would call millennials in this country, that they're basically Putin's people. They've grown up to accept the Putin system, that they like the stability, that they enjoy kind of personal freedoms, and they don't mind the fact that they don't have political freedom. Well, this protest turned out literally tens of thousands of exactly those millennials, those Putin people, and they were not happy at all. And what made them angry was not so much, you know, the lack of liberal democracy or bad relations between Russia and the West. It was the corruption. It was the fact that they look at officials of the Putin regime who live in palaces internationally, who have property in Italy, in Spain, Florida in some cases, and they look at how their own parents and they themselves are living and working very hard in Russia. Now the Russian economy is not doing so well, and they say this just isn't fair, this isn't right, and the corruption infuriates them. And so that really is a source of instability the regime's going to have to deal with.
You know, you talk about the politicians enriching themselves. I mean, it's unbelievable. You mentioned Medvedev, the prime minister. At one point during the protests, the demonstrators they had rubber ducks. That's a reference to what, a duck palace that he has? I mean, the guy's got yachts. He's got, you know, great big, there's one of the ducks, big mansions. Forbes says he's worth $1 billion, and it's estimated that Vladimir Putin is worth $200 billion.
Oh, listen, I mean, Eric, easily. These guys, you can't really put a figure on what they're worth. You know, the line that I appreciate most comes actually from the 19th century, from before the Soviet Union, before modern Russia, and that is that the Tsar of Russia is always going to be the wealthiest man on the planet. Vladimir Putin is the Tsar. Dmitry Medvedev is one of his top lieutenants, and that means the Tsar can make anyone into a multi-billionaire overnight. And, you know, hey, why shouldn't they enjoy this lifestyle? That's what they're doing it for at the end of the day. Are they squirreling away money abroad in, you know, Swiss bank accounts or whatever else they may be? Are they buying property in Europe or North America or Asia? Sure, they may be doing that. But the simple fact is, as long as these guys run Russia, which is the biggest country on planet Earth, it's 1/8 of the world's surface. Siberia, massively energy-rich, massively resource-rich. They're the richest guys on the planet, full stop.
And take a look. We're looking at a video now of what we're told is Medvedev's mansions. That looks like Italy. Look at that beautiful countryside. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah. And finally, Matthew, not just the corruption and all the money and enriching themselves. What about the morality? You've got a long list of Putin opponents who've been assassinated. Let me start with Boris Nemtsov, shot on the bridge. Anna Politskaya, the journalist, as we know, the crusading journalist. Alexander Litvenko, that polonium, you know, drinking the teacup in London. Paul Klebnikov, he was an American who was an editor at Forbes, and just last week, Denis Varenkov, in Ukraine, shot dead outside the street of a hotel. There's Paul.
Yeah.
What about that? What about that type of corruption when one by one they're falling and being shot down in cold blood?
Eric, this is a really important issue because, you know, recently, for example, Russian FSB officers, basically KGB successor officers, were charged in an American court for cyber hacking against the United States. We're definitely getting into a dynamic in the relationship where we're going after the Russian government, whether it's sanctions or criminal charges. I think we have to be very careful to live our own values here. You know, not presume guilt before actual evidence has been presented. The problem we have is linking any individual Russian to these specific crimes. But what Putin is definitely responsible for, in a moral sense, in a political sense, in every other way, is creating a system in which the message is, you oppose me, bad stuff's going to happen to you. You play by my rules, and you can get rich. So Putin is responsible for this system overall, but it's hard to, you know, did Putin plunge the knife into someone's back? Obviously not. Can we prove that he gave an order about hacking or anything else? We don't know yet. We have to make sure to live our own values and live by the evidence and what is proven. So I'd be very careful with any of these individual cases, because at the end of the day, it may come out that some of these folks were doing other dirty business and that, you know, that's why they wound up dead. But there's no question Putin's created a system in which this is very common.
And that system is continuing. Matthew Rojansky, thank you so much for your insight from the Wilson Center this morning.